Hey, welcome to the Man of Steel podcast. It's been a while, but I've got a very interesting guest today. As you know, we are about to release White Guilt, and we're having the very first screening, a sneak preview of us, if you will, at Arizona State. And Owen Anderson is the professor there. He's the professor of religion and philosophy. We became acquainted with each other, I would say, maybe about half a year ago. I appeared on his podcast. And what's interesting about him is that he is very much like the other subjects in the film. He has resisted the DEI efforts at his school. In fact, he's in a lawsuit with the school for forcing him to take these racial conditioning classes to see the world in a certain way. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about why was he, from my perspective, pretty rare individual who stood up and resisted. Because as you know, white guilt often silences many people. They should go along with it. But for some reason, Owen didn't. But first, let's have him introduce himself and kind of give us an update on the situation now.
Yeah, thanks for talking to me. It's always a great pleasure to have a chance to talk with you, and I can't wait to see the movie next week. We'll be premiering here at ASU, which is a great honor for us. Yeah, I'm a professor of philosophy and religious studies at Arizona State University. I've been here 26 years, and the training, there's a lot of kinds of training we have to go through, everything from like fire training to computer security training. So when they sent me an email asking me to take this training, it was about 3 years ago now. I didn't think much of it because we have to do that. HR for any big corporation has put you through stuff for legal purposes. And the training was called Inclusive Communities, which again is a positive word. ASU has become the largest state university in the country. And our president's kind of his mission is to say, we want to be the opposite of Harvard, where instead of being excellent but exclusive, we're excellent but inclusive. And so anybody can come to ASU, meeting very minimum requirements, and we want to do everything we can to make you excellent in your future plans, your future goals. And so I think that's a good strategy. And, that's the kind of path I took as well, going through state education. So I think that's great. I have nothing wrong with that. So I start the program, the training, and very quickly, the curriculum gets into explicitly DEI and begins talking about things like the problem of whiteness and decolonization and heteronormativity and intersectionality. It has a whole lecture by Kimberly Crenshaw of UCLA, who's the one who started intersectionality. And the hub, the middle that holds the intersectionality spokes together is whiteness. But when you look more closely into it, I saw it really wasn't just whiteness as a skin tone, because Clarence Thomas is in there also. It's specifically certain beliefs, which I would just call them, let's say, biblical Christian beliefs. And if you hold those and you're Clarence Thomas, well, then you're still the bad guy. Or if you hold those in your Owen Anderson, you're the bad guy. So that's what whiteness is a code word for biblical Christianity. And so I objected on all the things I just mentioned. Any individual one of them violates Arizona law. Arizona has a law that says you can't use tax money for state education to promote race blame and a whole list of other things. Race blame is one of them. So race blame simply means you say a person can be judged based on their skin color if they're morally good or bad. Now, I hope everyone listening to this would say, of course we can't do race blame. Right? That should be obvious. But we've been putting up with it now for about 4 decades, just towards the other direction, we might say. In other words, towards whiteness. We can look at a person, and if they have a certain color of skin, we'll say, well, that person is morally culpable, which is what your father and you have been working on with this idea of white guilt. So I objected to it. And I'll give you a quick update on the court case, and then maybe we can talk about why I did it. Why not just go along to get along? I'm represented by the Goldwater Institute, which handles cases especially related to government overreach. And what ASU did right away was they hired the law firm Perkins Coie. And that's interesting because Perkins Coie is the very political law firm that Hillary Clinton used for the Russia dossier stuff. And it's an odd move just because ASU has a whole host of in-house lawyers that they pay salary for. They can handle this case. It's not a complex case. But they hired this, in other words, this nationally known, very far left law firm, which tells you a lot is at stake. And what Perkins Coie did was they motioned to say, I don't have standing. So in other words, we're not even going to look at the substance of the case. The case can't even come to light. The first level of court agreed with me and said, of course, Professor Anderson can bring a case, because if he can't bring a case against ASU, then ASU is exempt. Nobody can bring a case. And ASU and its lawyers appealed that, and it took about a year for the appeals court to finally get back to us this last December, and they agreed with ASU. And they said, yeah, you don't have standing. So now we've appealed to the Arizona Supreme Court. And I believe just yesterday was the deadline for ASU to submit its response to our appeal. I haven't read it yet. But what that means is now the Arizona Supreme Court gets to decide if it will take the case up or not. So in front of us is this: the Arizona Supreme Court could say, we're not taking the case up, which means it's dead. Or they could take it up and rule against us, which means it's dead. Or they could take it up and rule for us. And all that means is we'd go back to a lower court and actually proceed with the case against ASU's required training. And that might end up at the Supreme Court also, the Arizona Supreme Court as well, because they may not like the outcome. Now, in the meantime, ASU, I think one motivating factor for why they don't want this case to go forward is that very early on, when we first started, I first started writing about this and Goldwater first submitted our case, ASU's officials denied it exists at all. And then when they admitted it exists, they said it wasn't DEI. And then they said it wasn't required. But I have screenshots that show it says required, that show it literally says diversity, equity, inclusion. It's not something I'm not imposing that on them, but they say that of themselves. And so I think in the court case, there'll be a very awkward moment where those administrators are put under oath and past social media posts or past news articles are brought out where they say one thing and then the evidence is brought out and where they say the other. And I think that they would like to avoid that at all costs. Now, one of the simplest things they could have done, and I guess if I was in charge, I would have done this, is right when I brought it up, they could have said, Professor Anderson, you're right. Thank you so much for catching this. We hired an external company to make this training. And now that we look at it, you're right, it doesn't pass our quality test. We're going to make our own training in-house at ASU to replace it. We really appreciate that you brought this up. Case closed. It's over. They can reword things to still do what they want to do, but they can reword things to be more careful. And none of this would have happened. Instead, they doubled down and hired perhaps the best known liberal law firm. And to me, that says this is a national campaign. In other words, ASU's ideological leadership knows if we lose this, that's a domino across the country. And so we've got to not lose this case.
So ASU is basically fighting for academia at large.
Well, yeah, the DEI agenda.
And if you were to look at it from their perspective, why is this so important? Why is it so important that they impose whiteness upon you? Why do you think?
Well, from their perspective, I think it's solving what I think is our main problem. It's called in my program the problem of evil or the problem of suffering. And so all of us as individuals and as groups try to make sense of the world and figure out, why is the world so difficult to live in? Why has it imposed so many hardships on us? And so this is their solution. Well, the answer is whiteness. If we zoom out a little bit, it is a Marxist solution. And when I say that, I'm not using that word as an insult, although I do believe it would be terrible to be a Marxist. I would never want to be one. But they say that of themselves. So it's not like a liberal calling a Republican a fascist. And if a Republican says, no, I'm a small government person, how can I be a fascist? These are professors who would say, yeah, I'm a Marxist. And they have like 1,000 kinds of Marxists. So they might say, well, no, I'm not a Marxist. I'm a this other thing, which is 2 steps removed from a Marxist. But the reason I mention that is it relies on external answers about why we do what we do, our environment. And so whether it's our skin color, our gender, our religion, our family of origin, our economic strata that we live in, whatever it is, that explains us, not anything internal to us. And so what they believe is you can make a good person by changing the environment they live in. And out of that, you'll get a person who is no longer doing bad things. We just have to keep refining it until we get that perfect person. And so this fits into that whole agenda. You get your students to believe the big bad guy is this other group. We'll call it, the whiteness group. And if we simply were able to get rid of them, I'm not suggesting they mean by violent means. I mean by re-educate them. But you and I both know what happens when they get in power, take over a country. But they would say, yeah, we'll just, if you've been raised in the whiteness, we'll re-educate you, which is what these trainings are for. And now you'll be over on this other side of intersectionality.
In the film, my father had a line that says, identity. He says, identity. It became all about identity, meaning that identity of immutable characteristic. And he also says something like, we started to believe in it as if it was something that was transcendent, flip us into a higher realm of understanding. But identity of immutable characteristic is something that you're born with. And university is supposed to be internal, the education of the mind. Would you say that Arizona State, in a way, is betraying its mission? We should go that far as to say that?
It's the largest university in the country. We have 200,000 students, roughly. And so you'll find verbiage that says exactly what you're saying right now somewhere at the university. And so, of course, they won't simply say from the top down, we're abandoning the mind. That's one of the reasons I took a stand. I think it's important for people to take a stand. This stuff is camouflaged. The training itself, once I got into it, it wasn't camouflage at all. It says DEI, it says intersectionality, it says whiteness, heteronormativity. It talks about how missionaries are agents of colonization. And that's not just as a Christian, but as a scholar, that's painful because they don't realize that the colonizing industries, like the East India Tea Company, opposed Christian missions. The English, who were making money off tea, didn't want Christian missions to go to India because they knew that they would teach the people in India that they are beloved by God and that they were made in the image of God and they have rights. And so in this training, they lump the two together as if missionaries just were, selling tea also, rather than saying, no, that's one of the conflicts of the modern world was corporations versus missionaries. So they use this very simplistic sledgehammer to take against their opponents' Christianity. But I think that the university, if I had to pick a point where it got to here, it wouldn't probably be a Marxist per se. It would be John Dewey. And John Dewey is education reformer, worked at University of Chicago. And I don't want to suggest that everything he did was wrong. What he asked was, how do we update American education for what America is currently going through? And that's not a bad question in itself. But some of his answers were leading towards this external kind of education away from internal contemplation about important questions. Because how do you translate that into a job? And so ASU is very focused on numbers, like what percentage of our graduates get jobs. We want to have good numbers to get into U.S. News and World Report. But there's not a direct comparison. Let's say, philosophy, or I'm currently teaching ethics, where we're asking, what does it mean to have a good soul? Well, what's the direct translation to a job? There's really not one. I mean, you're going to get hired probably, and I think an employer might like somebody who's conscientious and hardworking because they want to have a good soul, but it doesn't fit into the current, what I'll call the educational industrial complex.
Yeah. Because, there's always an opportunity cost in a way. When you bring in the indoctrination, kids are not stupid. They know what's that play. It's like if you go to a corporation, you kind of find out where the powers are, how you move up, who you have to pay lip service to. So there's a huge opportunity cost in a way. And I think what's interesting about this is they hire you. You've been there for 26 years, and they're not worried about their, the product, if you want to call it that, but then they're not worried about you in terms of how this may change you or how this may affect the way you teach.
Yeah.
In fact,
Well, that's a
it,
great point.
yeah,
Because one of the questions that the law firm Perkins Coie asked Goldwater lawyers was, "What has Owen faced by in terms of discipline?" And the answer they know from ASU, nothing. He wasn't disciplined. He didn't docked any pay or lose a week of vacation time. Nothing happened to him by not completing that training. And my reply to that was, well, wait a minute. Sitting through racism is a punishment. And you would know that for any other group. You would say that probably caused trauma, and we're going to offer you some trauma counseling now. But you asked me to sit through racism. And now you're saying I didn't face any consequences. That's a consequence in itself.
we interviewed Jodie Shaw in the film, and she basically states they were making me into a racist. I was having to look at things from a racial point of view, and so I guess that's what Aristotle State was trying to do with you.
Yep, it was.
You are a professor of very complex subjects. I mean, philosophy and religion, you can't get more complex than that. And then you are now supposed to teach that through a racial lens.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Well, yeah, that, and I think that's kind of the stream of intellectual history that Marx is working in is connected to Nietzsche also. And it's the idea that power is truth. So who is ever in power determines what the truth is. And therefore, we need to get power. So we get to determine the narrative. Now, with all of these things, there's some truth to that. Of course, there's truth to that. But the mistake is going from thinking the narrative being controlled is the same as objective truth. And also that everything's narrative rather than, there's some fundamental questions, the ones that philosophy deals with, like what is good and what is God and how should we live? Those aren't narrative questions. They're fundamental questions everybody can ask and answer, and they should do that. It's good for them to do that. But the idea is that your group, say whiteness, has had power, and that's why other groups haven't done well. It's always a zero-sum game also. And therefore, we simply need to flip it. And that's why 40 years ago, when it was called affirmative action and someone complains, the answer, at first, it might be it's fairness, but very fast, like within one question, the next question, the answer is it's your turn. You made other people suffer. Now it's your turn. I've been told that myself.
Wow, because we do have a clip in the film from 1995, and the reporter, you see it, and he says, yeah, innocent people may be called upon to bear the burden.
Yep.
He basically is talking about you.
Well, and your dad wrote an article that I've been using for over 20 years in my ethics class. I have applied ethics class, and it's an article about affirmative action. He speculates about his own kids even, so this is a while ago now, but it's one of the best articles because he goes through the pros and cons of affirmative action, because recognizing that, helping people get ahead is good. But the con, there's a poison pill in there that you're assuming you do so by making other people pay or hold them back somehow, instead of thinking of how do we create a whole system that's fair for people, for everybody. And so your dad has been leading the way on this for decades and being willing to think about and critically reflect on it. And so that's why he's always been one of my heroes in this area. But I think the other piece of this is that the good life is correlated to something like income and status, because those are the only thing affirmative action and DEI can help us with. Mm-hmm. Neither one of those can help us be an honest person or a wise person or a charitable person or a diligent person. All of those kinds of things, you'll never hear anyone being envious about that and saying something like, that other group, they've monopolized charity. And I'm so tired of them having all the charity. I want my group to have an access to charity. It's always money or status or fame. And so the sad part is that it actually ends up corrupting the soul, because you end up looking at, why does that group have all the money? And I hate them for having all the money. And I wish I had the money and I could use money for whatever I want. And that's not good. It's not good for anybody. So even we recognize, yes, we need money to pay bills, and it's good for people to have money above just pure bill paying. You want them to go on vacations and enjoy their life. That's all true. But when money just becomes the focus, and really what you're doing is you're cultivating envy and hatred of your neighbor. And I think that's one of the most disturbing things about it for me as a professor is in the classrooms, students are essentially told, look next to you and look around you, and you judge those around you based on what we're teaching you. And if they fall into the whiteness group, they're a bad person. And you don't even need to get to know them. You just know it from looking at them.
I think when you go into race, most fundamental problem with that is that you're going into lower values of humanity. I mean, we should have the Olympics, the Winter Olympics. I apologize if I forget the name of the young woman who
Yeah,
won
I know what you
the
mean. I
figure
forgot. Oh,
skating. Yeah, the figure skating. She won the figure skating. She said something that was really fascinating. She said, "I love to struggle because that's why when she skated that final, she was so happy. She was just, I wish she kept going and going, and so that's where you see her struggling and trying to master her craft, and it becomes so easy. But you don't get there without the struggle. What are you losing by focusing on race? We hear you talk, we know that you're a good professor and so forth, but they want to bring you down to race. And in the end, the students lose.
well, and yeah, that's right. And it's a great idea of looking at struggle. Just yesterday in my one of my classes, I was talking about there's a whole group. I was trying to see if my students could guess who I was thinking about. And I said, there's a certain family that people want to keep up with. And that was enough. They said, okay, the Kardashians, keeping up with the Kardashians. And I don't know the Kardashians. I'm not putting them down. But the image they project is that it is very concerned about how you look and having money and being flashy. Maybe they're all great philosophers in private life. I don't know. But there's not a similar sort of movie or TV show called Keeping Up with Socrates or something, where you'd value the pursuits of the kinds of soul craft I was talking about. And so that teaches, I think, still a kind of envy. Like the good life is the life of the Kardashian life. And if you can't have it, it's not because you didn't work hard enough. It's because someone took it away from you. And that's the thing is the work hard part, I would suspect, given what I know a little bit about how hard it is to make a professional video, if you were to look at a life of the Kardashians, I bet they work really hard in order to project those TV shows or podcasts to the world. It's not what people might think of how easy it is. It's a lot of work. But there's the whole narrative that, yeah, but even hard work won't get you ahead because the meritocracy is also whiteness. And it's set up just so only certain people have merit and they can survive. But I think at the end of my career, I think I could write a book about what I went through, because one of the things that surprised me is that the very people who are complaining about discrimination and about treating people fairly and about how unfair it is when someone gets power, they help everyone who agrees with them and they persecute those who don't agree with them. But that's what I've been put through my whole career. DEI and decolonizing got power in my college, and they immediately promoted everyone who agrees with them and kept people like me on the outside. But they would speak publicly against that, and yet they do it. And so as a philosopher and as a Christian, it is startling to me because on the one hand, I should expect that. But on the other hand, to live through it is startling to see that level of, it's a harsh word, but it's hypocrisy. And I think it tells us something about our human condition, that even a PhD, a scholar who studied things, is not exempt from the human condition. And that's what scares me more than the potential of being poor. Like if you were to say to me, Owen, if you lose your job, you can't pay your mortgage. And that's scary because I got kids. I got a wife and kids. I don't want to not be able to pay my mortgage. But what's even more scary is if one day I find out I'm a hypocrite. That'd be terrible.
Is that why you spoke up?
I believe that it'd be wrong for me not to speak up, because the saying that they'll use is silence is complicity. And there's some truth to that. And so if I don't speak up, there's a number of reasons why I have to. I did have tenure. And so I know some conservative professors at ASU who don't have tenure. And if they speak up, they probably won't get tenure. So it's on me to be the one to speak up. But also, I'm a philosopher. And if I don't speak up, I have to give back my Socrates card, because Socrates spoke up in Athens. And people have said to me before, boy, you sure seem to hate ASU. Have you thought about going somewhere else? And I tell them, why do you think I hate ASU? Well, you're critiquing them. Because I love ASU. If I didn't love ASU, I'd let them continue down a bad path. But I want ASU to be better, so I have to speak up.
What have been the the reaction of others, the student and professors to you on campus?
Well, it's been mostly from other professors, mostly being treated cold. There's not a lot of interaction, and the at the personal level, I can understand that, but it actually, I think, gets into some violation of the law because, for example, I'm on a committee right now, and I can't get anybody to respond to me on email. I don't think it's just because they're busy, because we're all busy. We all got work we have to do. But that's discrimination then. They can't treat me differently because they disagree with my politics when we're on a committee and we have to get something done. So there's a number of things like that where I can't do anything about that. You can't really document that or go to the HR about that. But there's a number of things like that, which is precisely what they would talk about. That's what they call microaggressions. And so I go through microaggressions all day long by people who say don't do microaggressions. And then my students, I actually have had students both ways where some students will say this is great. I've had other students go on social media and say I'm just a Christian who's trying to make everyone into a Christian. And that actually filtered into my annual review this year. Every year we get reviewed and we get a score based on our teaching, our research, and our service. And the score is very objective. There's just activities you do, and you add up the number for each activity, and then it gives you a number. And then that number, it tells you if you get a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, where 5's highest. Well, my number for teaching says I should get a 5. But I just got it back yesterday, actually, the review from my director. And a student in one of my classes wrote on the evaluation, in order to do well in Anderson's class, you have to believe in God. And they didn't give any proof. And there is no proof because it's simply not true. My tests are objective. My tests don't have anything to do with what a student believes personally. But my director still put that into my review and gave me a lower score because of it. And said we need to keep an eye on this. And so now I have to go through the process of appealing it, which is time consuming and frustrating. But I don't want that in the review because if I sign off on it, you're supposed to sign off and say you got your review. If I do that, what I'm saying is I agree that that's true. And I don't agree that's true. There's no evidence that I did that. But I suspect that if I was to do a Freedom of Information Act request for all of the reviews this year, there were other professors who had students say things like that, like, oh, you have to be a Democrat to agree with this professor. And they weren't written up because their ideology is aligned with the directors, whereas I was written up. And that's a hypothesis. I don't know that's true, but a Freedom of Information Act could determine if that's true or not.
Keep an eye on that. Yeah, and my father, I think he was started publishing. He went from being like the most popular professor to having like nobody in class.
Really?
So
Nobody?
yeah, I mean not nobody, but
Yeah,
it's
yeah, but
way
really,
down. Yeah, it's just way down. Yeah, and so yeah, so we kind of know what that's like. So I guess I have a couple more questions, a few more questions. Well, why do you keep putting up with that? Why stay there? Why stay at ASU? Why not just leave and go to a think tank or something?
yeah, and in one sense, I wouldn't be opposed to doing that because that's kind of the stage of career I'm at, where I've gone through pre-tenure, tenure, then becoming a full professor, writing the research books and research articles. So I'm not opposed to that, and in fact, that might be a direction my career takes. But I wouldn't do it because of this issue. I would do it because that's the stage my career's at. But I wouldn't want to jump ship for the reasons I mentioned before. And if you read through Plato's Apology, you read about the trial of Socrates. They kind of ask him the same thing. They say, hey, just go somewhere else. Go to Thessalonica. And you can ask them about wisdom. Leave us alone. And he says, I can't leave Athens. It's my city. It's where I was brought up. And I love Athens. I wanted to do well. And I'm in the same boat. I went to ASU. I care about ASU. I ended up getting a tenure track job at ASU, which is not normal if you attend the school. And so I've been there a while and I care about ASU. And so I speak up for that reason. It was interesting to me that when I first spoke up about this 3 years ago, a professor said, why don't you just go to Grand Canyon University, which is our local Christian school? And I thought to myself, man, imagine if that was like 60 years ago and someone like your father or someone else was speaking up and they said, why don't you just go to an all black school? That's what you're saying to me is I should just leave just to go to a Christian school where there's other people like me or something, instead of saying, you're right, we're acting in a bigoted way and we shouldn't do that. We're going to correct ourselves. And so I think the need to stand up and the need to correct these kinds of things is frustrating and painful. And so a lot of people don't do it. It doesn't increase your income. It doesn't necessarily increase your prestige. So why would you do it? But maybe because I'm a philosopher, those are all the things they told Socrates, and he responded to all of them. So maybe it's because I'm a philosopher also that if I was a historian, I'm not putting down historians. If I'm a historian or economist or any other job, I would still probably speak up. But I feel like I have a double responsibility as a philosopher.
Absolutely. It's interesting that you keep bringing up Socrates. I mean, it's been a minute, but if I remember correctly, the door was open the whole time. Like he could walk out, and but he decided to stay, and so his death, in a way, became a reflection upon the society. They killed him, therefore they are there. So you see that in the same way, like whatever happens with your case, you have to go through this because it becomes a reflection upon ASU.
Yeah, that's what he said at the end was, I won't be able to judge you, but you will be judged for what you're going to do by the next generations. And they will judge you much more harshly than I will, actually, because they don't have they don't have the same fondness I have for Athens, he says. And so they'll look down on you. But what's connected back to what you said about suffering, he tells them this. He was poor. He actually died in debt. His last words were, "Don't forget to pay back the rooster that I owe." He was in debt for one rooster when he died. So he wasn't a wealthy person, but he left a will at the very end of the trial. He said to them, "My only request is that you treat my children the way I treated you, and make them suffer to examine if they have wisdom or if they don't have wisdom." And that's the last request he had for his kids, was they'll need to suffer also to learn to be wise. Don't pity. You might feel bad about killing me and you pity them and give them an easy life, but that won't be good for them.
What I admire about you is that you choose the path of freedom. You haven't given it up. And I think that's what people really don't understand. Growing up, many people ask me, well, why won't you just shut the black box? You get all these benefits. But there's a kind of a loss of freedom when you do that. Because if I check it, I become beholden to the black scholarship. I'm never going to put myself in that position because ultimately, I think my freedom was the most important thing. And that's sort of why I can stay where I want to stay now. Because I can't be charged with that hypocrisy. And so I think, yeah, so I think that's what people really don't understand. But in a way, shown in freedom, in my opinion, freedom is always destroyed, even if you are a condemned man and you have to walk to the gallows. You have the freedom to decide how to walk there. So even at that kind of moment, you have a situation. And a lot of people will say, and I've gotten into many fights over this. They was telling me, as a white man, I can't stay there or I lose my job. As a white person, as a white person, they said that to my father over and over. And so I think that's what we admire about you is that you haven't done that you've taken that responsibility, you've taken that freedom.
Well, that means a lot to me. To be put anywhere near you and your father is a real honor. So thank you. But I think you're right. It's the freedom. And I think the related word I use is integrity. There's a freedom that comes with having personal integrity and speaking up for what you believe is right. Now, in one way, my colleagues all believe they're doing that, and I respect them for that. They believe they're speaking up against social injustice. And so it isn't as if they're saying, no, they're not saying the words, let's be unjust. But what they've done is they've not lived the examined life, and they've ended up still falling into groupthink. And the kinds of social justice they're talking about are the opposite of justice. And so that's one reason as well is I would still have some hope for them. I'm not writing them off to say, yes, I know you care about justice, just like Athens was the city of wisdom and they care about wisdom. So Socrates was not just a troublemaker. He wasn't just there to annoy people. You might think, oh, philosophers, they just annoy whoever they're around. No, he had one specific mission, which is this: Athens, you claim to love wisdom, but you can't even tell me what wisdom is. And so in a similar vein, I don't want to just go around annoying anybody I work with, but my humanities colleagues say they care about justice. It's the most important thing to them. And so as a philosopher, I'm simply doing what Socrates did and saying, well, but what you're calling justice isn't really justice.
Absolutely. You are, I think, in many ways, just embracing the American principle. And I think that's a great gift of being born in the country.
Yeah.
And do you have any last words? I mean, I was thinking what my last question would be, do you think there's any hope in academia?
Well, I do think there's hope. I think we're living at a time that we'll look back on as a kind of revolution, one way or the other. But I think enough people are frustrated, specifically parents. I think it's in the power of the parents, even at the college level. It's parents who sign off on $80,000 of loans for a kid or something. And so I think enough parents are saying, wait a minute, we trusted the system, so we weren't double checking. But now professors like Anderson are speaking up. We got to double check. And that's one of my programs here in Arizona is I want to do something. I'm calling it intellectual nutrition labels. So just like when we go to the store and we want nutritious food, so we look on the label, well, we should have that for our professors. And they can write it because they'll say it will be censorship if anyone else writes it. So I don't want to do censorship. I want a purely honest intellectual nutrition label. Tell us who you are. And then parents can look at that and say, okay, I think this guy is clearly, he's saying he's a Marxist, and I'm not interested in paying $20,000 for a Marxist to teach my kid. And that'd be fair, especially for state universities where tax money is involved, because we're employees of the state. And so this is one of the most remarkable things to me is that professors treat ASU as if it is their own private religious university, Marxist religion. No, we're employees of the state. And to take our job, we had to swear to uphold the U.S. and the state constitutions. And therefore, freedom of speech for us is still relative to keeping our contract. So is there hope? I think there is, but I think it's going to take things like what I'm suggesting and parents speaking up. And then many alternative models are being developed. AI will have benefits one way or the other, but AI will allow there to be a lot more access to education in like a homeschooling co-op or something. Will now have access to higher levels of education than without it. So they're already putting together like video lectures that look like Socrates, and he's accurately teaching you. So it's accurate what Plato would teach. So there's all kinds of new avenues which will threaten what I call the industrial education complex, because they're not going to be able to keep up. They have to pay for these huge buildings and these facilities. And so they have to have students paying tuition, but then all of a sudden there's all these other avenues. So I think we'll look back and we'll say this was a time of massive change. I do have hope, but it will take, me, but also, and you, but also your listeners and people they know. We all have to speak up and be courageous, because what you'll lose if you don't is your own integrity and your own freedom, as you put it. And I think you and I have talked before about how this is a great country because we do have that individual freedom.
We do. Thank you so much for coming on, and I cannot wait to show the film next week and
Pretty
with
great,
the
yeah.
student. So thank you for making that possible. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I'm so thankful to have connection and get to talk, and looking forward to seeing the film.